When the temperature inside your house drops below freezing, you throw the rule book out the window. In many ways, we do the same thing when we wrestle with the guilt we have over doing nothing. Hey there, thanks for stopping by. It's good to see you. I wanted to talk to you about laziness today. Have you ever found yourself in between tasks or, just segments of your day where you're not really doing anything productive? In the back of your mind, you're kind of writing this narrative to yourself about how you could be doing anything in this moment to move something forward in your life. And why aren't you doing that? You need to get up, you need to get going, you've got things to do, you got objectives, you got achievements, you've got metrics, you've got projections and milestones that you're behind on. I've kind of been in that place recently myself. So I happened to wake up one of these particular mornings a little bit earlier than I prefer to, and I happened to check my phone, and I found a really generous comment from Jackie on one of my recent videos. So Jackie says, "This video was timely. Tonight I decided not to do anything. That's unlike me, as I have a full-time job, plus a couple of gig jobs, plus elderly parents I take care of, etc. I really felt guilty not doing anything. So thanks for giving me permission to slow down. Someday, I will learn to give myself permission to slow down without the added feeling of feeling lazy." And that's what brings me to you today, because I immediately relate to that feeling. What's the biggest struggle you wrestle with yourself when you're in these moments of inactivity? I'd love to know if you'd tell me your story in a comment below. It'd be great. So Jackie, I want to thank you again for this comment and this inquiry that it kind of surfaced in me, because I've had a story that I've been trying to approach for days and days, and I haven't known exactly how to approach it. But thinking about your reflection on slowing down and laziness immediately surfaced this moment for me, and I hope it's useful to you as well. So the snow begins falling the night before the ice, and my son is super excited about the snow. It's one of the first of the season, maybe even the first of the season at this point. And it's past Christmas at this point. We'd just taken the tree down. All the decorations are put away. And we'd recently been traveling, over that holiday. So this was kind of the excitement after a bit of a lull and a bit of a return to normalcy. Well, my wife and I had heard about this big snow that we were going to get, something like 20 inches, right? And preparing like responsible parents do, we went ahead and grabbed a few days worth of groceries the day before so that we could be snowed in and be cozy and what may, be fine, together. Well, as the night wears on, I'm paying attention to the weather and a couple of people that I follow on social media who are more versed in all the patterns and data and maps than I am. And more, I start to see this narrative creeping in that, this weather is changing a little bit. There's this heat pattern that's rising higher and higher. They called it a warm nose, I think. It's coming from the south, and it's this loop of hot air that's pushing up higher and higher into the southern U.S. So this warm nose is going to meet this big cold front that has already pushed down into where we are. We're sub-freezing, right? That's why we're getting snow. Well, the narrative on all of this interaction, it really starts to shift that basically this snow that was supposed to be this giant heavy blanket of snow for us, it starts shifting higher and higher to the north, right? So in Illinois, even a few days before that, there was going to be no snow. All of a sudden, Illinois is getting the 10, 15 inches. And it looks like Nashville is on this cusp of like this torrential rain and this heavy snow. And what it amounts to is there's this layer of this front that is a little bit too warm to begin as snow. So we're kind of melted essentially in this warm nose region of the atmosphere. And then it's a little bit too cold on the ground for it to remain liquid. So what you end up with is freezing rain. Now, so much is dependent on the specifics of these patterns, how strong the warm nose is, how far it pushes up, and how resistant the cold front is, where exactly it's going to land, and this kind of sheen of ice across the U.S. is really kind of indeterminate. It's on really key factors. Even micro shifts in degrees can result in drastically different experiences in one place to the next. So we go to sleep with some conflicting details. Basically, the snow is meant to continue for certain regions, but then it's meant to kind of transform, over the course of time for other regions overnight. I go to sleep feeling okay about my circumstances, but there's a little bit of unease with that narrative, that's going across social media and the news. The news is really doom and glooming. They're preparing for like big, thick, half-inch glistenings, layers of ice, and they're coming right for us, supposedly. And other perspectives on social media that are paying attention to like micro shifts in the patterns are talking about how it's the cold front's holding and the warm nose is weakening and it's going to stay south of us. So having lived in Nashville for about 15 years at this point, I had no real recollection of any catastrophic ice since I'd been here. So I was leaning on that experience really to kind of color the comfort that I ended up kind of experiencing during that sleep. I wake up as I normally do and kind of stretch, and there's a, brightness in the bedroom, and I kind of just sit up slowly, and I remember that there was supposed to be some accumulation overnight. And so I peek out my window, and what I see absolutely terrifies me. The trees outside my bedroom window are absolutely encased in ice. Like every little branch of every twig, and it's winter at this point, there's no leaves, it's just twigs. They look kind of like this, right? They are all weighed down by this glistening, this casing of ice, right? They're all drooping. I've never seen trees droop like this. We live in a pretty woodsy type of neighborhood in the suburbs. And as I cast my vision beyond my immediate backyard, I see this ice on everything. And even the forest behind our neighborhood just looks like it's generally weighed down and sagging, right? And then the noises are just terrifying. There are these crackles. They called it a war zone after the fact. And that makes so much sense to me because it's windy, right? This weather pattern's moving through and you get this like echoey wind. I have the wind chimes that are on our front porch kind of going, and you hear these cracks and these snaps and pops and, like it's electrical lines, it's tree limbs, it's things collapsing on themselves, right? It'll stick with me for my entire life. That first walk that I took with my dog outside the house and listening to that natural cacophony of the ice just sort of pressurizing everything around us. So I flip on the news, after the dog walk, and it is absolutely astounding the transformation that Nashville has been forced under with these conditions. There are power outages far and wide. There are accidents galore. I even saw like a giant interstate highway like overhang with like the exit signs and everything. Like it had sagged to the ground. Like this big metal structure had collapsed on top of this semi, right? And it had just absolutely stopped traffic. And this was like an exit that I took all the time when we were kind of passing through the city. So it was not just the sight of this disaster that was unfolding. It was that it was so familiar to me because it was right outside my door. So as I said, we're watching the news and kind of paying attention to the narrative, and at the same time watching outside our house and observing neighbors and checking in on the state of just the immediate surroundings. One of the things that one of the news anchors says to me scares the daylights out of me. They say that it's only just begun, that the ice carries like thousands of pounds of pressure, right? And the longer that any structure is under this pressure, the more it's likely to cause problems, right? And we have trees everywhere and power lines everywhere, and it's inevitable that trees are going to give out, and it's inevitable that there's going to be this collision of nature and infrastructure, and it's only going to get worse over the course of today and beyond. So even in that morning, there was 100,000 plus without power, right? And they were very clear in their insinuation that Davidson County in Nashville was absolutely likely to see more and more and more power outages throughout the day. And so I had this existential dread because I'm looking at my power lines right outside my window and they're just encased in ice and it's dripping, right? Like it looks kind of like, I don't know, like icing on a frosted cake or something, just like layered on top, and everything's drooping, and all the trees that are historically so beautiful. And one of the big reasons that we decided to even live in Tennessee, they become this like haunted house of mirrors, where it's this looming dread of these like leaning trees. They're getting ever and ever closer to our, comfortable circumstance. Well, yeah, the day proceeds as normally as it can. I think it's a weekend at this point, so I'm not working or anything. We've got our supplies. We're pretty well stocked. I'm thinking about, what we're going to make for dinner. And I'm trying to like put the disaster notions out of my mind. Well, it's about 11 in the morning and I'm upstairs and my wife and my son are downstairs kind of running around playing. I think they have a vacuum or something, right? And the TV blinks off in the middle of the newscast. And I look around at the room and nothing else is on. And it just snaps together in my mind. It's happened. Our power is out. My mind just seizes in absolute terror in this moment. The disaster that the news had woven into my conscious mind had presented itself right in front of me in my own reality, my physical space in my house. I had turned the HVAC up ever so slightly, but it was a pretty conservative bump, and I was immediately just cursing myself for not bumping it up 5 or 6 more degrees, I head downstairs and I look my wife sternly in the face and I say, it's happened. They didn't realize because they had this like battery powered vacuum, right? But, my wife sees the dread in my face, I'm assuming, and she kind of snaps into action with me and we start to take preparations. You see, we don't have any means of heating our house other than this gas powered HVAC that requires electricity to turn on and off. We have a fireplace. It was like a cool feature when we bought the house, but we never got it serviced. And we've never operated it in all the years that we've had the house. And it just dawns on me that we really hadn't prepared to lose power. We'd been prepared to be shut in because of the snow drifts, right? Nashvillians don't really adjust to snow very well at all, and places will just shut down. And it's pretty simple to just buckle in for the short term because the weather usually rebounds and we don't carry that snow for very long here, But I have absolutely no clue what to do without heat in this moment. And it's below freezing already, and it's going to dip into the teens tonight. So we're scrambling. We're looking for candles and we're looking for matches. And immediately I try to fire up web searches for, keeping yourself warm at night. Some survivalist information about how does one persist in really cold temperatures and how does one position one's family and what actions can you take during the day before things get off the rails. Well, alongside our power went our internet. All I have is a mobile phone. We're all on the same carrier, and AT&T has not given us anything in this moment. So not only do we not really have a means to heat our house, we don't have a means of communicating with the outside world reliably. Like I can send a text out and maybe get it through if I do it as an SMS. I can't do iMessages at all. But even then, it's unreliable. And I have to be positioned a certain point in the house and just keep trying. And eventually I can get a message through, after several attempts. So we're stuck in so many respects, All we can do is look for the blankets and the pillows and the warm things that we could potentially wrap ourselves with, gather the food that is able to be utilized without too much trouble. And then we start to think about things like, the water supply, right? The colder it gets, the more likely those pipes are to freeze. So we start filling containers with liquid that we can keep and use for whenever the inevitability of the water situation turns on us. My wife had read the night before about the idea that you could stick a candle or a set of candles under a porcelain slow cooker and get some semblance of heat going with that ceramic. So we immediately set to work on that to try to get some kind of warm source going. The entirety of the day at this point is just really focused on the impending doom of the sundown and nightfall, and minute by minute, the temperature in the house just dropping, right? We're stuffing towels under cracks of any sort that we feel any sort of a draft in with windows or doors. We're closing any unnecessary spaces in the house that we won't be going into so as to have the heat distributing only where it absolutely needs to. We're just looking outside, every 5 minutes to get some semblance of, is there a utility truck coming? Is there like any neighbor that's in need? Is there anyone else who's passing by or outside who may know more than we know in this moment about what's happened and what we're looking at in terms of our restoration? So it's just the most strenuous space of 5 or 6 hours as we're preparing for the other side of this day in these conditions that we know we're about to face. So the sun goes down and my wife starts to light more candles. She eventually pulls out flashlights as we are going to need that space for, using the bathroom and just the preparations we're going to have for nighttime, right? So there's this moment where I find myself on the couch and all of these narratives have sort of converged into my mind. I'm telling myself about how terrible of a parent I've been to allow this circumstance to befall my family. What kind of a father doesn't prepare themselves in their household for the inevitability of having lost power on a cold night? There are problems that are surfacing themselves, new problems, moment to moment, as I'm sitting on this couch. Things like I brush my kid's teeth every night, before he goes to sleep. How am I going to brush his teeth? At this point, we have shut the water off because we're afraid of the temperatures overnight and just the impending fact of having no clue when the power is coming back on at this point. So we filled bathtubs full of water and containers for our purposes, right? So I have to figure out how to judiciously use our supply. I also have to do this in the dark, and my baby's 3 at this point. He's not necessarily the most cooperative, even in the most agreeable of circumstances. I'm thinking about how comfortable are we going to be tonight? We're all obviously piling under blankets under the bed in our room together. I'm thinking about, will we be able to sleep? And my mind is going in many places because it's getting pretty cold at this point. And I'm thinking about, how will my son stay warm? How will I know if he's not staying warm as I try to sleep overnight? And there's just like so many thoughts going on in my head, in this moment. I'm still on the couch at this point, right? It's just before bedtime. It's pitch black in the house, minus the candles and the flashlights that my wife had brought out. I don't think I can accurately describe to you the terror that a parent experiences watching their child's face turn redder and redder, and watching the breath escape their body in their own house, and knowing that there's nothing you can do beyond sending a request to the universe to restore your power and help you keep your child warm. So I am suffering a great deal in this moment. I've been on this couch for maybe 10 minutes. Just on the surface, it appears that I'm just kind of staring into nothing, right? But in my mind, I am so many places. And suddenly something snaps me out of this dialogue that I'm in. It's my son. He's looking at me and smiling. And he's just said, "Look at that big circle star up there." So I cast my gaze to the ceiling of our living room, and my son has positioned a flashlight. He's leaned it against this ottoman in the middle of our living room, and it's pointing up at the sky. And I look up at that, and I look back at him and meet his gaze, and I say, "Yeah, that's really cool." And then he looks again and he has this moment of recognition, and he says, "It's the moon." And I thought, wow, I've never thought of the moon as a big circle star before, but that's a really cool way to think about that. And my mind goes to our bedtimes at night. He's got this little projector in his room, and when we turn this projector on, it projects all the stars in the sky. And right above his bed, there is this big moon. And I imagine him looking up at this moon every night before he goes to sleep. Another thing I realize in this moment is that my son has been having an absolute ball all day today. Capping off with tonight, where he never gets to play with flashlights because we never have any need for them, right? But he loves this one particular flashlight. I've got it right here. It's this one right here. He turns it on and he's like, hitting our dog in the face with it, and he's just flailing it around everywhere, and he's running around like a crazy kid, and I'm as I said, I'm in this dialogue, so I don't really pay attention to it, but he's cackling and he's having so much fun, and my wife is kind of, chasing him around, bleeding with him not to wear the batteries down because of, the problems we're trying to solve in our head, right? Well, today's been so wild and interesting and fun for him. He gets to wear these big, crazy, fluffy coats and double socks, and he gets to tromp around in big winter gear in the middle of the house. That's a really strange thing, He gets to eat all kinds of like snacks because we haven't been able to really cook any traditional food. And then he's been so excited that we've been telling him we're going to get to sleep in the same bed together, Like we get to have a sleepover. So on this couch in this moment with my son, where I'm probably in the most hellish state of mind that I could potentially imagine myself being in, I meet my son's gaze, and he reminds me ever so gently that it's okay to look up at the night sky and see the stars. And isn't that such an amazing thing about children? That they can tell themselves a story about their experience that gives them endless joy in nearly any circumstance. And that's another thing that I've recognized in myself as a parent. As I've grown to have that responsibility over another life in the way that I have as a father, the amount of narratives that I can write that criticize myself and my actions, my lack of preparation, my lack of capacity, they have doubled and tripled and quadrupled and just become more and more numerous in any given moment. But what I want to leave you with, and Jackie, what I hope will really ring true for you especially, is that in any given moment, we have the opportunity to tell ourselves a different story. And the story that we choose to tell ourselves can be our salvation or our damnation. So I might ask you, as you move throughout your day today and our time together ends, to pay attention to the stories that you're telling yourself. And for more stories about the stories that we tell ourselves, please check out this video right here. I'd love to see you there. Thanks for watching.